They told me this was an LGBT event. The applause should be louder than that. Come on, people. Right? Who's excited to be here? Who's excited for Pride? Okay, now the TV cameras are turning on, so hold on. Let's get formal. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our special evening reception and the final event of our 2017-18 season, our 121st season at the Canadian Club, and our third LGBT event at the Canadian Club. Let those numbers sit for a second. My name is David Simmons, and as the director of the Canadian Club of Toronto, I'm pleased to be your host, and I'm delighted that you chose to spend a part of your evening with us here tonight. We are tremendously proud to be hosting a conversation around inclusion, advancement, and acceleration of leadership on Bay Street here tonight. Canada as a nation stands out as a leader globally for LGBT rights. And as we discuss tonight's topic, let's use this opportunity to reflect on how we, as business leaders, can continue to advocate for those who feel and remain excluded because of their sexual identity. Let's challenge ourselves to bring these conversations back to our workplaces, to have these conversations without fear or judgment, to drive inclusion and to facilitate open discussion about LGBT issues in the workplace across Canada and around the world. Because while we've made progress, there's still much more work to do. Thank you for being an important part of this conversation, and I'd like to welcome our webcast viewers from around the world. I've always wanted to say that, like Wolf Blitzer, Michael Serapio is here, but I'm like, well, around the world. Sarnia, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I mentioned Michael Serapio is here. Michael is joining us here from CBC News, and as our moderator today, I'm going to ask him to draw a business card. If Colleen, our executive director, can come forward, we're going to draw a business card from the bin, and the winner is going to win a complimentary wine of Foreign Affairs Winery in Vineland, Ontario. Michael, you can tell us the winner. Oh, Kevin! Kevin is with Sick Kids, and we love him. Congratulations. The Canadian Club is a Canadian institution. It's been around for 121 years. Institutions build culture. Institutions drive change, and that's why it's so important that we're here tonight talking about an important part of our society that's often been at the margins and is increasingly at the center of conversation like it is this month. One of the traditions we have at the Canadian Club is to make a toast to Canada. So those of you that have a glass, I'd ask you to raise it. I don't have a glass. And toast to Canada. Thank God we're here. Before I introduce our esteemed panel, I want to thank IBM, that's represented by Kimberly Messer, for generously sponsoring our reception this evening. Let's thank IBM and Kimberly. Are you here? Yeah. Thank you, Kimberly. We appreciate it. I also want to thank Navigator for providing this wonderful space and the beverages here tonight. While I'll formally introduce Navigator's Executive Chairman, Jaime Watt, in a moment, I would be remiss not to take an opportunity to talk about the shoulders that many of us younger executives and leaders on Bay Street stand on. Jaime's Executive Chairman at Navigator. He's been a longtime friend of mine and a mentor. He's a true pioneer for our community. He's been a man who's not afraid to show his pride when it wasn't cool to show his pride. I'll never forget the moment when I worked in this office and a few of us were openly gay. Most of us were openly gay. And someone joined our team who was a little bit more effeminate than the rest. I've become more comfortable with my identity over the years. And some of us started to criticize and to make fun. And Jaime came over to our workspace, and it was in a different office at the time, and he said to us, if it wasn't for those who had the courage to put on the feather boa, to wear their leather, and to be proud in the street and Church Street, we wouldn't have the privilege of sitting here on Bay Street, going over to Osler and McCarthy's and IBM and Sick Kids, helping them with mission-critical problems. So stop and put on your feather boa. And it was a moment of real courage and change. So thank you, Jaime, for what you've done and for making that a part of our conversation. After decades of advocacy, it's heartening to see pride flags flying everywhere in buildings and progressive organizations across Toronto and in Canada around the world. My question to you as you listen to this panel is, during this month, are you flying your own personal pride flag? Or are the conditions in your workplace not making it safe enough? Joining us to help facilitate this conversation are esteemed panelists from a variety of different sectors in Canada with very different experiences and stories. The first is Amma, the acting director of the City of Toronto's Equity, Diversity, and Human Rights Division. Previously, she was a labor, employment, and human rights lawyer in the city's legal services division. Let's welcome Amma. From the business community, we have Luke, who serves as the president of Western Foods. He brings a deep experience in consumer goods, particularly food, chocolate, and pet care. His expertise includes branding, product development, and operations. Thanks for being here, Luke. Charlotta is a 20-year IT industry veteran. She's seen everything from the typewriter to the iPhone. An IBM distinguished engineer, she currently serves as IBM's Chief Technology Officer. She actively promotes the role of women in technology and is a Society of Women Engineers member. Thank you for being here. Jaime is the executive chairman of Navigator Limited. He's been deeply involved in equality and human rights issues for a number of decades. He was the inaugural recipient of EGAL Canada's Lifetime Achievement Award, and Jaime recently received the Out on Bay Street's Leader to be Proud of Award. Let's welcome Jaime to his office. And Michael Serapio has been with CBC News since 2010. He began as a breaking news host, and he currently anchors weekends on CBC News Network. Michael, I'm pleased to turn things over to you and our distinguished panel. As we say at the club, the podium is yours.
Thank you, sir. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for taking part in this discussion this evening. Thank you to Navigator for hosting us once again, and thank you for the Canadian Club for asking me to be a part of this evening. Now, I'm going to begin with a word here, and that word is authenticity. A bit of a buzzword these days, as we hear it quite often. The idea that being who we truly are, rather than creating some artificial or disingenuous versions of ourselves, has value, not only for us, but also the idea that being authentic in the workplace is valuable for companies and for employers. Now, that sounds good, but of course, we all have our own workplace experiences shaped by our own histories. Perhaps part of that is cultural, part of that might be the messages that we receive on popular media, or what we hear in the corridors and the hallways of where we work, or perhaps even where we play. And through those experiences, we know, at least anecdotally, that people are described as less than, made to feel less than, perhaps held back because they are perceived to be less than. And for all our celebration of differences in language, is it actually good to be different? Is it easier to stand up and acknowledge your difference, or is it easier to lie about your difference? So, we know that different is not always safe for us. We know that it has not always been good historically for us. And that brings us to this evening's discussion. And as we mark Pride Month, as we celebrate Pride Month with LGBT on Bay, an incredible group of individuals, as David told us, has joined us this evening. And I want to actually begin this discussion with a quote here. As I was doing some preparation for this evening, I looked up some quotes from Harvey Milk. And of course, this was a quote that he said while he was running for office in San Francisco. But I think you can apply it to areas far beyond government. And in that he said, "A gay person in office can set a tone, can command respect not only from the larger community, but from the young people in our own community who need both examples and hope." So let that be our starting point today as we talk about Pride Month and this evening. And I do want to begin broadly here, so I'm going to go down the table and ask you. It's fairly broad. On the upside, we had 2 hours, but you could also, just very quickly, I want to begin with our own personal stories. At what point did you decide to be out in the workplace? Share the circumstances. Tell us how difficult or not difficult that was. And I'll begin with you, Oma.
So what's my story? I came out to myself when I was in law school, so like many more years ago than I care to acknowledge, maybe 18 years ago, something like that. And I went through, and I was in my second year of law school, and I went through the process of having to like disclose to people I already knew and dealing with the awkwardness of that. And so as I started to prepare for work, for articling, I decided that I didn't want to do that again. I didn't want to go in pretending I was one thing and then having to go through that process. And my decision was, I want to go in and be who I am. And if people don't like me, then I don't know any different. I don't have to deal with the reaction. So that was like a conscious decision that I made going into work. And obviously I didn't go out and announce it to anybody, but I made a decision that I was not going to change pronouns. So when I talked about my partner, I talked about her as she. And that's been the work for me. But I think it is, I don't read, I read as straight. So even though I never pretend to be otherwise, I do have to, sometimes bring it up, because in spaces, especially because I'm Black and I'm a woman, and sometimes that, people talk about difference in that respect, but also to make a point about invisible difference as well, that it's not the identity that people immediately think about when they see me. And to the point that was just made about Jaime, I think that I've done a lot of reading as part of my coming out process early on, and I thought, yeah, we are standing on the shoulders of those people who could not be out because they just presented in ways that caused people to read them as LGBT. So I think it is important for those of us who can hide to try not to, so that we can also be identified and we can bear whatever the burden of being out at work is, that we can kind of share in that burden and not leave that burden on the people who are more visible. So that's my...
Okay. And I will say it's interesting because as you talked, you touched on intersectionality, which we'll talk a bit about this evening as well. But Luc, tell us your story.
Yes, coming out at work, I came out at work early 30s. I started working in early 30s. My 20s were very interesting. And for me, very busy, yes. So started working, French Canadian, gay man working in a Anglophile, all boys network, very U.S. Midwest conservative company. I changed pronouns. I hid things. I fudged details and all that stuff. I had a lot of stories in my head that I would be seen as less than, that I would be seen as less aggressive, less driven, less sharp, and it got to the place where, I guess, like many of us, where it became more painful to lie and omit details and all that stuff. And at one point, just said, "That's it. I'm coming out." And it was a fairly gradual process that lasted 3 weeks. Where you tell one person and one person tells another person. Before you know, there wasn't any email much back then. So there was a memo on the board, pretty much.
It's like an advent calendar.
Yeah, exactly. It was a bit. I probably created most of the pain myself because of lacking confidence. Early in a career where it's not. You're dealing with, starting a career and, establishing your credibility on top of all these other things at the same time. But it quickly became extremely liberating, where we're able to talk about authenticity. I was freed up to be myself, and for me, shortly thereafter, my career just took off, and I was able to really let my own personal style of leadership just come out, and it turned out that the organization, a very conservative organization, needed a type of leadership that was much more out there, much more engaging, much more authentic, much more ready to call things as they were. And so for me, my career just took off very shortly after that, and it was very good in the end.
Charlotte?
Well, I came out at work about 3 years ago. I was fortunate enough to be on assignment with IBM in Melbourne, Australia. And so Pride Month is the middle of winter in that hemisphere. So it was a dark, late in the afternoon or early evening. And IBM started a campaign, an ally campaign, where allies and out people could put little rainbows on our corporate directory pictures. And I got this email, go ahead and self-identify if you wish, or would you like to join the Ally program? And I looked at who was already an ally, and it was my manager and my manager's manager, and in fact, the general manager of the country. And I said, well, with that kind of support and alliance, I can't help but feel safe. And right then and there, I clicked the button that I wanted to self-identify as being lesbian with the company. And I think exactly to your point, freeing yourself up that way, you don't spend the energy hiding. And as a little vignette, I was fortunate enough also to be in the Naval Reserve for 21 years as a diesel mechanic. There's a story to that, because I really wanted to go to sea, and the only trade that was open to women to go to sea was to be a diesel mechanic when I signed up. So needless to say, in the early 80s and through the 90s, I was so far in the closet, I was a garment bag in terms of my presence to the Navy. So all of that hiding and stories and going on fake dates and all of that kind of stuff. So from that perspective, fast forward to 2013, 14, what a liberation. And I personally also feel all that energy that I wasn't using hiding, I'm now putting back into my community and work, and my career has absolutely taken off as a result of it.
Jaime?
Well, just as I start, I want to remember that we're not the first people to be on this land, that we follow in the footsteps of many, the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, and most recently the Mississaugas of the First Nation. And we can only hope to care for this land as they did. Navigator, we tried to follow the principles of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, which governs this place, which says take what you want, make sure there's enough for others, and leave nothing behind. And that's how we try to live our lives every day as we work and create and be together on this land, Miigwech. In terms of my own coming out, to be able to dream about something, you have to be able to imagine it. And I couldn't even imagine my life today in order to dream it. And I am of that generation and of that place in society where I had a very important role to do, and that was to find a beautiful woman and get married and have kids and keep this deep, dark secret literally in the closet. I thought it seems hysterical today, not hysterical as in the funny, but hysterical in overreacting, that I had two choices. One was to be in the closet, and the other was to kill myself. And eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I was married, I got blackmailed for being gay, and I blew up my life, and I had to start again. And today, I can't even imagine it. I am so blessed. I have a partner of 23 years. I have an amazing daughter, son-in-law, two terrific grandchildren. I'll tell you all about them. all the cliches of grandparenthood are true. We have 4-year-old Henry and 2-year-old Oliver, and it has worked out after a serendipitous road amazingly well, and that is why I'm so passionately committed to being out. Because every one of us in this room, and I don't mean to be on a soapbox, because you wouldn't believe it if you weren't here, our kids are still killing themselves at 10 times the rate of straight kids, and modeling behavior is still the most important thing. Why did I become the president of the 120-year-old Canadian Club, or the Albany Club, even more boring than the Canadian Club, founded by Sir John A. Macdonald? Why? Because I wanted other gay kids to know. If they were that weird kid like I was, who didn't want to play sports and wanted to do something else, they too could be it. So I'm just very grateful to have the opportunity to have all of you here tonight. And thanks to Michael and this amazing panel. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is pretty. And thank you for sharing the stories. I'll share my story very quickly. When I first graduated from university, I thought, do I need to stay in the closet in order to succeed? And I was assigned to this woman, Lucia, who was teaching me everything at the station that I worked at the time. And as we were watching the overnight feeds, a feed came in from Australia, and I said, oh, that guy's cute. I guess I'm not in the closet. But in truth, that was facilitated by my grandmother, because I had an uncle who died of AIDS-related cancer in 1993, and he came out when I was 12, and at the time, my grandmother was visiting from Texas, and she said to me, "I have something to tell you that I haven't told your parents yet, but your Uncle Chuck is gay," which I knew I was, but had not verbalized it at that age. And so I said, "How do you feel about that?" And bearing in mind, we grew up in a very Filipino Catholic family. And she said, "You know what, Mikey? God is love, and God will love your Uncle Chuck, so we're fine." And that didn't get rid of all of the struggles, because as you said, we always have to do work with ourselves. And as my career became more public, it was every day we were coming out all the time. But that said, as we stand on the shoulders of giants, I had a very personal giant in my uncle and my grandmother. So that's my story. I want to also say, as we have this discussion, and as you can see, we have 4 incredible speakers here that are very willing to answer questions and talk about what their experiences and what's on their mind. We do have a roving microphone. So if at any point in this evening you have a question or a comment or want to add something, we're very happy to cater the discussion. As I said to these 4, the more organic this discussion is, the better and more fruitful it will be. So feel free, if you want to say something or ask a question, raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you.
It's a pretty smart microphone if it knows how to rove.
There we go. Okay, let me bring this back to the questions right now, because, you know, as we talk about our experiences, I do wonder, you know, we sit here as members of a certain generation. You know,
Except for me, I'm young. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I know.
He does know. He does know.
So we're here of a certain generation, and of course we walked the path that we walked, and we did so in a particular time. Based on your experiences and being out there, do you think people are still apt to not be their authentic selves at work and hide who they are and not be out at work? Luke, I'll start with you.
Okay. I think overall it's, and I'll speak for what I see in my organization and in my life. I think overall it's probably easier. And I'm talking, it's always in situation. I mean, large corporation, publicly traded corporation, you work in the corporate office, in a corporate tower, probably easier, not necessarily easy, but easier. There are so many things. I mean, I think of my corporation, I mean, all the special events, the month-long Pride celebration, the Day of Pink, and everything that's being done anyway for inclusivity and the importance of, for a corporation to succeed, the importance of attracting the right talent. The great talent is so crucial that I think if for certain size of companies and type of work, it's definitely easier. Not necessarily easy, but easier. I put my, then I look within our organization where I have thousands of people working across North America, different states, different type of work. For a line worker who I had a chance to connect a couple weeks ago, who's transitioning from female to male, working in a factory in Brownsburg, Indiana, which is located right across the track from Whitestown, Indiana, where Mike Pence is the leader of that state. I mean, the reality is slightly different. But that being said, for me, I had the pleasure of sitting down with this individual, and the appreciation, the level of gratitude for all the efforts that we do, either as leaders or as our corporation do, to make, even if it was a slight difference of giving pink cupcakes. I make cakes and donuts, so we sell cakes and donuts, making pink cupcakes on a day, on a special day, just to talk about inclusivity, and we can all make a difference. So for me, I think there's been a lot of progress, but still lots of ways to go. Because people nowadays, I mean, we were fighting for benefits. I remember fighting for same-sex benefits. Now I look at the emerging class of leaders and organizations, and they want to break the glass ceiling. I mean, they want to be, 10, 20, 30% of the senior management team. So it's just a continuum, and it's a journey that continues.
Mm-hmm. Charlotte?
From my perspective, it's interesting actually, because there's being out in the context of gay diversity, LGBTQ, but there's also societal, and I was privileged to speak at an event with the Asian community a couple of weeks ago, and a lovely young Vietnamese man came up to me who was an ally, but he said, my household is so strict. And it was almost the opposite of perhaps what the gay community felt, was that his first generation family to Canada, he felt so strict and stifled at home that coming to work was freedom for him, and seeing everything in the dynamic in the workplace. And I thought that was interesting in that kind of sectionalism. But from my perspective, and in fact, personal journey, I went to Australia with my wife prior to them ratifying legalizing gay marriage, same-sex couples. And we were concerned, as like, well, they haven't legalized, how are we going to be there? Well, their society was leap years ahead of the policy in the government. And so from that perspective, we had a wonderful time and felt so warm and welcome, and saw as a society that even though legally the politicians hadn't quite caught up, as a society, they were very open and promoting that. And so I would say, and the IBMers, and I met a lovely gentleman tonight who's come out and has joined us, and thank you for your participation. It's great to see you here. So from that perspective, I see that it's much, much more open in the context of diversity.
Jamie?
So I look at it because of what we do here. I look at it from a sort of a data-driven point of view, rather than just an anecdotal point of view, because, of course, we live in self-selecting worlds, which are not necessarily reflective of the broader, wider world. After all, we see certain politicians getting elected, and that doesn't necessarily reflect our lived experience as to how the vote might have gone. So fight for equal marriage, fight of my personal life, when we look at where we started, just in one generation really, to where we came to today. Today we have almost 9 in 10 Canadians supporting equal marriage. Just think about that. We have almost 9 in 10, just shy of that. And the good news is the ones that don't support it are dying. And they're not being replaced one for one. Okay? So this is getting a lot better all the time. So we can say that if that transition is taking place in the public and in people's lives, that will be translated into where they work. The problem is it's not equally distributed across every workplace and across the entire country. So that is where there is still work to do, where people still feel, a salesperson who wants to close the sale, and the customer says, well, what are you doing with your wife this weekend? Do they really want to, at that moment, risk that deal and their commission, or do they just go back in the closet rationalizing it or not? So I think it's fantastic, and where we have to look for hope are our kids. I'm so fed up with people being down on the young people in this country. They are terrific. I think, sure, a couple of them right now are at Shoppers Drug Mart swiping condoms, for sure. But most of them, these issues are our issues. They're not their issues. They have moved so far past this debate, they don't even know what a coming out story is. And this is where we have to have hope. Years ago, my daughter, she had 13 friends. I'll make this story fast. 13 friends. You saw one in high school, just wait 5 minutes, you saw all 13. 13 times 2, 26 parents, divorces, a parent set of, say, 42. Someone's going to die. Father dies, right, just actuarially. They're at our house that night for dinner. And we're, hanging out. They're lacrimose, dad's, whatever. So I'm there. They're 17. They're drinking. They're allowed to be drinking, of course. So I'm trying to, whatever. And I said to one of them, if I didn't know their name, I just called them Megan, because there was a 1 in 2 chance. They were called Megan. And I said, Megan, I always worried about Heather having 2 dads. And she looked at me, and they always called my partner, Paul, and me, Mr. Watt. She said, well, Mr. Watt, you don't get it. We think Heather's the lucky one. Because you and Paul are great, blah, 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 whatever. And then I realized these are our baggage that we're carrying. And we got to get rid of this crap. Because that's not how they feel. And the Canadian people are fantastic, the best people in the world.
Big.
Somebody want to say anything there?
I mean, I will agree with, echo a lot of the points that have been made, that it is your context. But I think even in context that I am out at work, I have been for the last 13 years at the city, but I have colleagues who are not out at work, who never have been out at work, and who probably will never come out. Maybe, I hope that they will, but that do not feel that safety. So it's not clear what that thing is. That, so I'm not really sure. I think about one person in particular, and I think that there are family pressures as well. There are lots of things that people are juggling in their lives that make it, make being out, whether it's, just not an option for everybody. Although I have to say that in talking with this person, I think it's difficult not being out, right? Because you're going through a devastating breakup. But you can't tell anybody at work because nobody knows that you have a partner. And I think in this particular case, it's kind of because everybody seems to know and everybody seems not to care. But for this particular individual, they do care, and they have, and it is what it is. But I think that it's a challenge not to be out. And I think, but it is, it's an individual process as well as to where one is on one's journey. And if you're willing to do that and be visible in this way. And coming back to the intersectionality point, the people that I'm thinking about are also people of color. So also already, it's just do you want to take on this other thing? You're already visible in this way. And so that's another experience.
I do want to pick up on a point there made by Jaime, and because we have these discussions, and I think it is very easy to talk about how far we have come for the vast majority of people when you're in a city like Toronto. And of course, Toronto is not exclusive in this country. There are large cities with large LGBTQ communities. But what does it mean to say about the challenge that is still out there for a young person who is in small town Canada, rural Canada, who hears this type of discussion, come out because your life will be better for it, but their reality may not reflect that. Talk about the challenge of that. Is that a government challenge to keep putting messages out? Is that a corporate challenge for companies to take on a more public messaging? I think it's spectacular, the story that David shared about you, Jaime, because I've seen examples of that with you as well, in making the statement about where this modern day movement comes from. But that's not a common occurrence. It's not an experience for a lot of people. How does that bar get moved, do you think? I'll be with you, Jaime, actually.
Well, I think what we have to do, and I remember about 30 years ago, I went to a seminar on what we called then affirmative action. We don't call it that anymore, but that's what we called it then. And it was led by a woman who was the worldwide executive senior, worldwide important vice president of people and whatever at Apple. And she said one thing that stuck with me from that day to this. She said, all of you there are sitting thinking about affirmative action in terms of compliance. We think about it differently. At Apple, sorry to tell an Apple story, I just realized sitting next to the IBM person.
I have an iPhone, it's okay.
She said, at Apple, our goal is to sell computers to everybody. So we think it's a pretty darn good idea to employ everybody. And you need to start thinking of this as a competitive advantage and not about compliance. And I know here at Navigator, I mean, it sounds cliche or quaint now, but I know what happens when you can bring your whole self to work. You know, and that story that David very nicely told about a colleague of mine who, when he's going out to a meeting, he would put his makeup on at his desk, not in the bathroom, not hiding or whatever. And we were one day going to a pitch or going to some very important meeting. Like, come on, let's go. Where's Andrew? We're all in the elevator corridor. And so it's just like, you know, in other news, water's wet. Andrew's putting his makeup on. So we waited and off he came. And I think that we just, as business leaders, have to spread the message that this is good, not only is the right thing to do, it's good business, because people will perform better when they can be who they are at work.
Is it good business, Luke?
Absolutely. I mean, you want people to be at their best. For me, one of the most important moments in my career, remember, I was being trained in Virginia. I was working for the Mars family. John Mars came down to the meeting room. He says, Luke, this week, I thought I was going to a very boring training on supply chain and balance sheet and all that stuff. And John Mars came down and says, Luke, we're training you this week to be your best, because we want you to be your best, because we know the organization will greatly benefit in return. And the importance, I mean, smart corporations know it. They need to attract the best talent. To attract the best talent, you have to have the best working condition. You have to create, and the best working conditions when you allow people to do their best. I moved down to Nashville, Tennessee, to run a division of Mars, and for me, I remember the best reward I had. I came down there first one. I said, you know, people were asking me about dress code because I arrived there in jeans and T-shirt, and everybody's wearing shirts and ties and everything. And I'm like, I don't want a dress code. Wear whatever you want, because I want you to be your best, and I want to get rid of all the superficial stuff that gets in the way. So absolutely, best practices. Best practices.
Mm-hmm. Charlotte, and I look at you because I've read more than once that in the tech industries, when they look for places to open offices, in order to attract people, it has to be a place that people want to live in. And part of that equation is how they treat members of the LGBTQ community.
Absolutely. And from IBM's perspective as well, we have dedicated channel sales to the LGBT community. So we absolutely recognize that having like-minded people selling to like-minded people is exactly a competitive advantage. And exactly the workplaces and being a fairly large company, at least here in Toronto, we have offices everywhere. And you can exactly tell from the urban versus the more suburban folks that want to commute. But we will accept, and we have a mobility program in the context of work wherever you're comfortable, wear whatever you're comfortable in. And we still do sort of have, we now have a new code that I just found recently called weekend casual. And so I think the tie is loosening a little bit, and that was actually at a lab in New York State. So from that perspective, I think that the social norms that are coming, as well as the general more informal nature of society, absolutely lends itself to that. So it's not an issue, and from a corporate perspective, the competitive advantage to be able to say that I support this, and the initiatives also in terms of being strategic, and I think you would appreciate this, Jaime, as well, is that, you know, our chairman at one point got in a little bit of hot water because of alliances and affiliations to business councils that the President of the United States had put together. And she stood fast and made a really important comment that I appreciated, which is that if you're not on the field, in the game, then you can't influence the outcome. So I don't want to walk away. I may not agree, but I'm not going to walk away because then I've lost my ability to influence and I've lost my ability to have a voice. And I really appreciated that because, again, she made it clear that she may not necessarily be aligned to the policies, but she wanted to stay in the game. And I think that that's an important leadership attribute.
Yeah, and understanding the bully pulpit, and to that point that, you're not going to tax cut your way to getting Amazon or to getting these new economy employers to come to Toronto. You're going to get people to come and settle in Toronto because it has a labor market pool and a quality of life that is going to make us competitive. So I would say to the Premier Designate, he said he's going to go to every border crossing and take down the sign that says, "Welcome to Ontario," and put up a sign that says, "We're open for business." Well, that's fine, but I would suggest that he march in the parade as a better sign of indicating that we are the kind of place with the kind of labor market and the kind of attractiveness where people are going to want to live. If he really wants to be open for business, much better than putting up some sign, it would be to take an action that was a sign. But that's just my point of view.
I want to, again, I'm not going to add anything on the point about the competitive advantage and making the business case for inclusion, but I want to just address another part of the question, which is what can we do to impact change in these smaller communities that are not Toronto? And I was thinking, I had the time to think while everybody was talking, and I was thinking of a couple of strategies that I would suggest to people, is to look at organizations that do this work in those communities and think about when we think about where we donate our money, and maybe there are causes that we can support in these communities. One of the things that we try to do is when we're traveling through and we're going through small towns, we do try to do some research to figure out, is there a gay business there that we want to, if we're going to stop for lunch, let's go and support a gay business, because oftentimes that is the hub, that is the place that people can come to be out in smaller communities, so that we think about like different ideas for how we can support, because our young people are like out and proud in Toronto, but there are like the suicide rate is, I mean, it's horrendous. And more so in these communities where people don't have people to look up to. And so for those of us who are leaders of organizations that have offices in these branches, like policies are important. They send a signaling, they play a signaling role about what kind of organization you are and what you value. So I think we need to really think about that, like not just supporting our local organizations, because things are not perfect here, but they're much better than they are in lots of other places.
Yes.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to challenge you a little bit because I think you all work at organizations where it is completely, not completely, but it's acceptable to be out, and there still have been challenges. There is still a big part of the business world, including in Toronto, where it isn't easy. You know, Exxon Esso, I think still has Human Rights Campaign 0 rating because they buy other companies and get rid of their LGBTQ policies. Just in my own personal context, working for an American company, I am gayer than gay in Canada. When I go to the US, I don't talk about partners. I don't talk about personal life. They do. They don't ask me. They may know, they may not know. So I think there is, I was at a national law firm where I started an LGBTQ group, so I'm not a shy retiring flower. But the looks on people's faces, there was silence. No one said you can't do it, but they were not having a parade in the firm for me for doing it. So there is still a big part of the world out there where it is really hard, and it's hard every day. So how do you address that?
And I'll reflect that back only because I do many events, and one event I did was with a Canadian company that has many branch offices in the United States, and we did something similar at the panel discussion where people could call on the phone. And even though the company, again, Canadian-based, had very progressive policies when it came to LGBT issues and being out in the workplace, American workers were saying, well, it's nice that the corporate office is like that in Toronto, but my manager down here in this branch still is not. And so they were raising their challenges. So just to reflect what you're saying, how do you address that issue?
It's hard. It is hard, and it is true. Like, I had a conversation just yesterday evening. Someone called me up and said, I want to recommend you for this opportunity. And she said, but what I'm struggling with is whether I mentioned that you're a lesbian, which was like like yesterday evening, I had this conversation with somebody because in that context, she was really struggling with whether that would be a good thing to start with. So, and that is Canadian. Yeah, I don't have those kinds of conversations a lot. But the reason why I struggle with this is, first of all, I think it's a personal decision, and your best place to assess your comfort, right? And what the risks are for any one of us in any context. But why I struggle is I also recognize that the burden of being that it's not going to get better unless we're more visible. So it's hard while we recognize that it is difficult, like it's that balance of like the burden, it's not going to get easier unless there are people who do that, who are at the forefront. Like in those contexts where it's hard right now, that perhaps there is an opportunity for those trailblazers who are going to be the ones that are going to be targeted, and they're the ones that are going to suffer consequences that we're not suffering. But because I recognize that because those people, we're here now because those people paid that price for us like 20 years ago and 30 years ago. And so that's why even in that context, it's like, okay, yes, but I am a lesbian. It's part of my story. So whatever the consequences are, let that be. I don't want to start that. But I mean, I don't mean that to say everybody should be out, but I think that it's good for us to ask ourselves that question, that is this an opportunity? And maybe it's not early on in your career, but maybe there is that point that maybe when one is close to leaving the organization, maybe that's a point to say, you know what, let me do this and test the waters to see if I can help it be better, because I feel so strongly about the next generation. They're coming out earlier and earlier, and they need the models, and the consequences when they don't have it are so severe that we really need to think about what we can do.
Well,
But it is hard.
Perhaps also as a suggestion, collaboration. So the bigger corporations that have these diversity programs and support that, be the role model for the smaller to medium businesses, and exactly as part of those alliances. And by all means, please reach out to me after, and we can collaborate and start organically to build those informal networks, but also walking the talk through business as well.
Can I add one? I was also going to say, like most organizations, they might not be progressive on LGBTQ issues right now, but maybe where they are is they want to talk about women's issues. And being supportive and creating an inclusive environment on that one issue tends to create an inclusive environment like on other things, and openness to diversity in general. So maybe it's like looking at what your organization is, and on the inclusion spectrum, like where are they and how can we put a lot of energy in that, and hopefully down the road that will manifest to more openness on LGBTQ issues and as well as others. And I just also want to put I don't know that any of us is trans identified, and also kind of acknowledging that is a whole different identity, right? Like that is a whole different experience of being out, and what transitioning is, and the misconceptions and misunderstandings, and that is, even in Toronto, even in progressive organizations, that is still a big challenge for people.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of overkilling it, I don't think anybody disagrees with you. We all have examples that are very positive. We all realize that either by region or size of companies or geography, these things can happen. But I mean, what can you do personally? For me, I wear that I'm gay as a badge, and everywhere I go, if I go visit a plant in Joplin, Missouri, you know what I mean, where I just put on my pink running shoes and I put my brightest pink shirt, and I'm out there. I go visit a customer in the Midwest, and they ask me, how's your wife doing? And I to this day I still hesitate. It's like, oh, am I going to lose $1 million sale, or what do I do? I said, screw it. I've got my team members with me. I'm plunging. I said, my partner is doing this, and la la la, and I've never lost a sale for it. I've been very nervous about losing a sale, but it's what can you do as a person to change things. And as long as we're all consumers, so we can vote with our dollars as well, and take our dollars away from these companies. But I agree with you. There's still instances where companies are not as progressive, and they make decisions that in the long run is going to hurt them, and it hurts allies in the meantime.
Just to affirm and build on what my colleagues have said, it continues to be hard. We recently acquired a new client in a sector that we didn't have a client in. And at this stage of our business, there's very little left because of conflicts and so on. So when there is a large sector and you get a big client there, that's something that you work very hard for. And this is a family business, multi-billion-dollar family business, very socially conservative family. Probably when they retained me, didn't imagine that I was gay. We didn't discuss it. I didn't hide it, but we didn't discuss it. There was no reason to discuss it. And they came last week, for the first time to our office here, because they're old-fashioned that way. They wanted to see where we worked and what our team was like and whatever. And someone said, should we take we had a pride flag for the month of June in our lobby. You might have seen it when you came in. And one of our team said, well, should we put that away? And I said, no fucking way. And that stayed there, and it provoked a conversation. And he can make his choice. But it doesn't get easier, right? It's still hard. We want that client, but we don't want them under any circumstance. And I think the more we come back to, we used to have this quaint thing called National Coming Out Day we used to work very hard on. If everybody could turn purple on the third Tuesday of every November, then they would see that the postmaster would be gay and the gym teacher and whatever, and everything would be fine. We sort of got away from that when we got Will and Grace and some of these popular things. But that is still the story of the small town, right? People that people depend on, the first responder who saved someone's life, the doctor who she delivered most of the babies in town, the teacher that changed kids' lives. And we just all have to, we don't, it's like the schoolyard bully. You got to tell the schoolyard bully, they can't have your lunch money. And the answer isn't to fight stigma by hiding. That said, I made the critical point, which is this is a personal choice that no one ought to be pushed or bullied into. And sometimes our community, I think, inappropriately bullies people into making a choice that they're not ready to make. And that's just as wrong.
I'm going to circle back to this because I do want to pick up on a point, but we also have a question in the room.
Hi, I guess my question is probably part two to the previous question, or probably a complementary question. So my name is Basil. I work for Rainbow Railroad, and for those who don't know the work of Rainbow Railroad, we help persecuted LGBTQ individuals get to safety where they can be themselves and live freely. So the first part of my question is, I am the contact person, the first contact person for all the requests that we get from all over the world. And the majority of the people of the requests that we get come from homophobic countries, obviously. So the five of you were very lucky and privileged to grow up in Canada, and even though you guys faced a lot of challenges to come out of the closet in Canada. So what is your advice to those people who reaches out to us and they are in the closet for 20 years and they want to come out, they just want to live freely? And so that's part one. Part two, there's a small percentage of the people we help, they come to Canada, and I don't know if you heard about Chechnya and Egypt. We are helping people now from Chechnya and Egypt. And the first question they ask me, Basil, shall I come out of the closet as soon as they arrive? And I'm a huge part of me want to say, yes, the weather is great outside, you should come out. But there's a small percentage of me, I'm worried about you guys. I don't want to put you in a situation where you'll be outed to your community back home and troubles will show up. So what is your advice to these people, or what do you suggest they do? Thanks.
So, does anyone?
Okay, I'm from Nigeria. I was born and raised in Nigeria. I've lived in Canada now for 20-something years. I haven't been to Nigeria in 17 years, but I have that itch. I feel like it's time for me to go. I'm very out. If you Googled me, it would come up. This was part of my conversation yesterday. I'm it's not going to be really hard for them to find that I'm a lesbian. If you Google me, you'll find it. But it is something that I think about, right? As I prepare to go into Nigeria, what will that experience be, and what risks do I face? And I think so. It's hard to give advice to people in a context where, not that people do not get killed and harassed in North America, but I think that the risks are it's very, very different risk. And so I feel like the advice that I would think to give to people is, to the extent that one can find community, but also I see that Jeff Rock is here, BMCC Toronto, service is broadcast on the web, and so that there is, because I feel like there is that feeling of isolation. In Nigeria, for instance, there used to be an LGBT organization, and the leader died a few years ago, and so there's some grassroots here and there, but not an organization, and that is what I find the most heartbreaking, is how isolating it must be. Like, Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, however, it's because homosexuality is criminalized. You're probably scared to tell your neighbor, to tell your friend, who may know somebody else, but like to take that risk to even find a community. So it's really hard, and it's even to say, like, try to get out, but people are leaving their families, and that's really a hard decision to make. So honestly, I'm not sure what I would say other than that, like, hopefully that the internet allows people to at least get that message that they are not alone in that context, and hopefully, and I think that supporting organizations like Rainbow Railroad is an important part of the work, and also getting groups together to sponsor people, like we're part of a group trying to sponsor an LGBT refugee. So there are lots of ways that we can help organizations on the ground.
I'm going to step away from being a moderator here only because I was born in the Philippines, and we immigrated here as well. And I think it's interesting, and we were going to talk about intersectionality. I keep saying we're going to talk about it. But I have to say, growing up here in Canada, there's a great sense of individuality. And while a person of color from more traditional countries rather, have an idea of individuality, individuality really exists in the familial context as well. One does not leave their families the way. When I was coming out, a lot of people isolated themselves out from their families. In Torch Song Trilogy, Harvey Weinstein's character has this wonderful speech. Why do you think I cut you out of my life for 20 years? I had to cut my parents out in order to be gay, And that is a very difficult challenge for those who grew up in traditional cultures and traditional societies. And even though, like you, I can easily be Googled and you can find out that I'm gay, I also do a lot of Filipino-Canadian events. And in the beginning, that was very hard for me. It's like, do I acknowledge that I'm gay? Do I purposely talk about my partner? Do I purposely not talk about my partner? And I will say, the advice I would give as a man of color from a traditional society, these are individual choices. And in fact, this is the same thing I'd say to anybody who's LGBT in even small town Canada. You have to decide what is safe for you. We can only make the decisions that we can make, and we can only live the best lives we can live. And if you make a choice that endangers your life, then you need to take a step back and think about, is this the right choice to make? Is now the right time to make that choice? And that is, I don't think there's a hard and fast answer in that, but whatever choice you make sure it's a safe one.
The only thing that I'm not capable of giving advice for people living in another country at all. Navigator supports Rainbow Railroad's efforts. We've raised money to rescue people from Jamaica and other horrible experiences. But I would tell them that they can count on Canada. And they should know they can count on Canada. They can count on officials. They can count on the government. They can count on the immigration process. And they can count on the Canadian people. And in all the things that are going wrong for them, and I know that sounds like, the Hallmark card or something, it's not. That is in the very fiber of this place. This is a country of the Charter, and we mean business when it comes to that, and they should know that when they're leaving something.
Or bring them to Woody's and see if they still want to stay in the closet.
That's still open.
First, I just want to make a comment that there's this ongoing joke amongst many women in our community that there's nobody gay at CBC.
It's hard to swing a dead cat.
So my question is about youth. So, as you know, we have the school that we host at MCC, the Triangle Program for Youth. But offering opportunity to help that dreaming part, what in your companies or in your organizations do they do? Because I know we have internship programs, but is it existent that the LGBT groups within your organizations, do they specifically try to mentor LGBT youth so that they can actually develop some dreams? And I think that's, some opportunities that they don't imagine can exist for them in many instances. And beyond that, do you actually make, in your organizations, in your groups, do they make efforts to mentor young people that are LGBT? I know many of you have children, so that's...
Well, I can certainly, from the perspective of IBM, yes, absolutely. It's interesting, too, because I know we're going to get to intersectionality, but as a female executive in technology, I'm quite frequently also alone in my gender. And so STEM programs and making sure that we really want to encourage the science and the technology education programs. And I think organically, as part of that, myself, I do actively go out and seek mentoring relationships. It's really baked into the DNA of IBM as well as part of our IBM programs. So I do personally, because I'm also an out executive in the company, people know that, and so I also get approached. And it's, again, part of that communications plan. But yes, absolutely, from an activity-based perspective. I recently have moved to Toronto, so I haven't really had a chance to get in the community yet. I've been settling with my lovely wife and 2 lovely dogs, finding our way through Toronto. But that, to me, is exactly now the extension of giving back for me personally.
Yeah, for me and my organization, there's no such mentoring that's formal. It's a fantastic idea. I'm going to take it. Thank you. But there is an informal network where we connect and guide more junior individuals joining the company on how to just guide them, answer questions on how to be yourself and succeed in the workplace. It's a good idea.
And if I may, also, I can offer up that we have an ally program and a badge program in IBM, too, that I'm happy to share with you, because it's exactly as part of showing people that by taking a little self-paced course online, you can then assert I'm an ally and be part of that fabric as well.
We don't have a specific program either, but journalism attracts a lot of members of the LGBT community, and there is a group that gets together, and oftentimes that is how new journalists, new members of the CBC meet the more established, I hesitate to say older, members, and through that the informal mentorship does happen. So, but to that, I do want to bring up this idea, because we mentioned intersectionality. And as we talk about issues like mentorship, forget about mentorship. Do we as a community do enough to make sure that we support other members of the community where we are? We talk about the importance of being out, and oftentimes that is almost a self-serving journey, that once we've accomplished it, then it's a done issue. Mm-hmm. Do we have enough of a focus of creating community? Are we too individual in terms of measuring our accomplishments? Jaime?
Well, let me be controversial for a moment. Once we achieved much of the equality agenda, I began to reflect on what the next agenda would be. And in many ways, we are not a community of leaders, a community of givers. And there's a lot of complicated reasons for that. We were dying. I stopped counting funerals when I got to 75 because I couldn't count anymore. And so it caused a certain kind of behavior for a while, like, why the hell would you worry about the future, worry about anyone else when all your friends were going to be gone? I've got picture after picture after picture of groups of us where everybody else is dead. And for a long time, we didn't have children, right? So part of what caused you to think about the next generation is if you've got the next generation to worry about. That's changed now, of course. And so I think one of the things that we really have to do in order to care more about others, I think we've got a lot of work to do in that area. And I think one of the next frontiers, and I think Jeff, who's here, you know, one of the things I think is so important is that we build the institutions of the civil society. I think our Jewish sisters and brothers who can teach us a lot about building a community that is fully integrated, fully participatory in every part of life, but is not just religiously distinctive, is culturally distinctive as well. And I think we can learn from that. And I think part of that means that we have to learn to be generous to others. And we have to support organizations and activities and things that don't affect us personally, but contribute to a better sense of community from which we all benefit. And that's what I think we need to work on next. And we need to work on that generosity and that caring for people other than ourselves. And that's not to be critical, because I think there's a lot of very real reasons why we got to that place. But the past is in prologue, and it's not like that anymore. So I think we've got to change with that as well.
Alma?
Sorry, I'm just reflecting on that and just thinking that that is such an important point, because I think that when we think about allies, we think about our allies, who are our allies, LGBT allies, but not so much about how we can also be allies of other communities, and I think and other people. So that is going to, I think that's one of the things I'm going to take away from here, and really think about that.
Let me jump off on that point then. Let's get to intersectionality.
It's become the joke, though, of the evening.
It's the finale. Because we talk about allies, but there are members of the community that I included have intersectionality. And so it is allies, but it's also speaking to me. And I don't know if the community has come far enough on that level.
And I would agree with that, but I think that that's one of the reasons why Jaime's point resonates with me, because it gives me a frame for thinking about it, that we're given our history and where we've been, that maybe that explains why it does appear to me, as somebody who has intersecting identities, why the community seems so LGBT focused and not as much as I would like to see on other equity issues, that even when we've made the progress, that we're not looking back and thinking about who's still behind and who's not where we need to have. I can tell you, I'm leading the equity diversity portfolio at the city overall. And in my context, sometimes people are actually happy. People want to talk about women. People want to talk about LGBT issues. When you raise race and ethnicity, people immediately say, oh, but we have to hire the most qualified people, or something like that, right? Like, it's a very different conversation. So it's interesting in this context, like which diversity dimensions people are comfortable with. And so
just let me jump in there, as if to imply that a person of color could not be qualified.
Yes, and my experience is that when we talk about inclusion of LGBT people, and when we talk about inclusion around gender, well, women in particular, people don't, like, that issue just does not come up the way that it comes up when we talk about people of racial and ethnic minorities, or no, not minorities, people who are racialized, for instance, and so that is like a part of the, so I think that to the extent that increasingly as our communities, as on the inclusion spectrum, like, we're getting access, it's important for us to use that access to also look and see and bring that up, because people with racialized people or people with disabilities are part of our LGBT community as well. So if we want our whole community to progress, it's important for us to be allies to all these other identities and to think about it as part of our work in advancing our community, because how far are we going to get if the people with disability amongst us are still facing like barriers and they're not able to live their authentic lives? So what matters, as important as it is for us to live authentic lives, it is that important for everybody else. And so what can we do to facilitate that for everybody in our community, but also communities that are not ours?
Does anybody want to say anything to that?
No, I'm well said.
We're actually about to wrap up right now, but before we end this, I want to get the measure of the table here. What message do you want to put out there as we mark Pride this year? What message do you want to put out there to not only the people in this room, but to the young people who may see this on the web, who may hear this messaging? And what do you take out of this discussion? And since I began at this end of the table, I'll begin at that end of the table to wrap it up.
I thought I was going to have a few minutes to think it up. I think that on the positive side, we've come farther in a journey than I could have believed possible in my lifetime. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. I give thanks every day that I live in Canada. I think we've got so many wonderful things. And it's like any journey. If you look behind, you go, wow, look how far we've come. And if you turn around and look ahead, you go, wow, look how far we still have to go. And all of this can be taken away from us, you know. A harbinger of that is the difficulty that former Premier Wynne had with the sex education business. Now, I'm a parent. I don't know anyone who doesn't want to outsource sex education. Who the hell wants to talk to your kids about, here's a book, you know, go read it, right? But, you know, what happened to Ms. Wynne, we can debate whether we like that or not, but what happened was a group of people who came to Canada, brought values with them that were not Canadian values, congregated in a particular area, right? So they would have political power. And all of a sudden, we're bringing ideas that were not mainstream Canadian ideas and Canadian values. So when we think the work is done, it's not. We have to fight every day, not just to preserve what we have, but to continue to advance it. So that's what I would take away. I'm very hopeful. I think the kids that are coming after us are, I mean, as I say today, there's a young man at the back of the room who I don't know if I'm allowed to out him or not, but he says it's okay. This guy at the back is a superstar. His name is Simon. He's one of my colleagues here. And if I had to compete against him for a job here, he'd win. I wouldn't even get a job in Navigator anymore, right? So as long as we're in the hands of young, talented people like that, we'll just be fine. But we've got to stick up for them. We've got to provide a way, and we've got to give them a hand as they get started in their careers in life.
Charlotte?
Well, and first of all, a privilege and an honor to be on a panel with you. And my takeaway from this is get into the community more and give back, and the advocacy that you have here. And from my advice, and I think living an authentic and genuine life, be free. And I promised myself that when I came out that I was never going to lie again. That's caused me a lot of grief, but
especially when you were going 30 kilometers over the speed limit.
Yes. How can you give me a ticket? Well, you're the one that did it, not me. Anyway, quite right. But in all honesty, that actually makes life really simple. And so in the context of living a simple life as possible and taking that back to the community is my takeaway from here. So thank you for allowing me to participate.
Thank you. Thank you very much as well for allowing me to participate. For me, the message is be authentic, be yourself. You'll be your best. But know that nobody's rushing you to do it. Do it at the pace that you are comfortable. There's no rush. When the time is right, you'll know it. What I take away from this here today is that this is an issue, this is an opportunity that we often approach too much with a rational mind. And I think we should approach it with love as well. And we approach it from a rational mind because we know it's good for the bottom line. It's good to be perceived right in society. We feel good. We check the box of Pride Month. We check the box of Anti-Bullying Day and all that stuff. And we forget to really think of the community and to think of the individuals and to think of the hearts and the minds that we're touching. So for me, I'm very inspired for having been here today because I've been in the box of checking a lot. I've been falling in the trap of checking a lot of the boxes and feeling very good about it and forgetting to really come at it with the love, with the giving back. So thank you. I took this away from today. Somebody shared this very generously, and it's really impacted me. So thank you.
Yeah, Yes, I want to also say thank you to the panelists. I have these conversations a lot, and I have things that are going to sit with me and resonate with me, and I already said one of those things. The last question where we talked about allyship, I think it is an important point, and to some extent, I guess it ties with Jaime's comment about the election, although I might put it a different way, but that's a different thing. But I think that even if we are particularly concerned about our community, that we need to think about what does it mean when we're not seen. Are people going to be allies to us when we're not allies to them? So even if we're thinking about it from a purely selfish perspective, that there is, even in that being selfish, there is value in starting to look outside our community and to consider, well, not outside our community because all of these communities intersect with our community, but even beyond that, looking outside our community and sending the message, like, are people, if we did, if we invested in and partnered with organizations that serve new immigrants, if we partnered with organizations that do interesting work with religious communities that are not necessarily allies with us, isn't there some shift? Like, if our work spaces are comfortable, but what about in the way that we spend our time outside of work? So that there are opportunities there for us to be allies, and I hope that I can leave you guys with that message that we really need to think very seriously about how we do that better.
So I think one of the great things about being a journalist is that oftentimes when we have panel discussions on air, we don't necessarily provide all the answers to all your questions, but hopefully a starting point from which you can begin your own exploration and begin your own discussions. So with that, as we celebrate Pride, what a wonderful thing to have 4 incredible people share their thoughts on these issues, and may that be a starting point for you as you go from here and celebrate Pride. Thank you to Navigator, and thank you to the Canadian Club for having us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Good evening. My name is Michael Bach, and I am the CEO of the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. I have the privilege of being a member of the board of directors of the Canadian Club. And I want to start by saying thank you, merci beaucoup, to our panelists, Jaime, Charlotta, Luke, and Ama, for sharing your stories, for being authentic and exposed in some ways, although we can come back to the whole weekend casual, which for me is a lot of exposed, I'm not going to lie. I came out of the closet 31 years ago. I know, everyone's shocked. I was 16, and I didn't come out to work until I was 30. And I lived in the U.S., where I could have been fired for being gay. I'm still not sure how everyone didn't know, but really, let's move on. And I didn't come out until I worked for a guy by the name of George Smitherman, who you may know as Ontario's first openly gay member of provincial parliament. And it was because of George, who, say what you will about good old furious George, he lived an authentic life. He was loud and proud. And it was also because of people like this man right here, who I happened to meet during the '99 election campaign, that were setting examples as leaders. And to all of you, you set examples as leaders. And we still need that. We still need people who are in senior executive positions to stand up and live their authentic lives, to send a message to young people who are still saying to themselves, is it okay for me to be openly LGBT in the workplace? So we still have a lot of work to do, and I'm very encouraged to be at our 3rd LGBT event with the Canadian Club of Toronto. I want to say one other thing about Pride. So this weekend is Pride here in Toronto. And to your point, Ama, I want to remind people that the lived experience of yourselves may be very different from the lived experiences of others. And I'm a white, cisgendered man. I'm going to spend Pride in my backyard because I don't like crowds and overpaying for beer. It's very important that we create a space at Pride for everyone, That includes people who are trans and gender nonconforming. That includes people who are racialized and whose difference of experience, particularly, let's lay it on the table, the police, that's their experience, and we need to listen. And that's all I'm going to say about Pride. I'm getting off my soapbox. Michael, I want to thank you for moderating. Michael and I have known each other since we came out. We were probably about 19 or 20. And you still have your hair. And I'm just going to say I'm angry about it. Is it spray foam like mine? Is that? No. Before we close, I really want to thank our sponsor, IBM, for joining us today. IBM has done some fantastic work in the LGBTQ space. I also want to thank Navigator for hosting us in your beautiful offices. I'm sure all of our offices look like this. I run a charity, so that is not the case. I also want to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for live streaming this event. Be sure to check it out. Send it to your friends. You can watch it back. I would also encourage you all to join our mailing list. You can do that at canadianclub.org to find out about all of our events. This is the last event of the season. The team is going to tomorrow slip into a coma right before Pride, which I do after Pride. But I do want to encourage you to stay and have a drink and socialize. I want to wish you all a very happy Pride this weekend, and thank you for being here. Good evening.